Hello and welcome again to the 42 Courses podcast. I do apologise, stumbling at the first brick. And today we have got a specialist in behavioural finance, decision science and sustainable investing. It's Greg Davies from Oxford Risk. I'm delighted to have Greg here, and we've created a new behavioural finance course with him, which will be coming soon. And so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to talk about this subject. So, Greg, you're very welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Great to see you again, Greg. And maybe you can just kick off by a very general introduction, telling all of our listeners how you first became interested in behavioural finance and any maybe early experiences that shaped your thinking.
Yeah, sure. Kind of by accident in a way. I started life as a very normal pedestrian economist, classical economist. I did my master's in economics. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, so I became a management consultant for a while. And I was working almost exclusively in financial services. So it was economics with a finance angle to it. But throughout my undergrad, I'd always had a side interest in philosophy. I'd done a philosophy major in my undergrad alongside the economics. And I got to the point in my consulting where I just thought I had unfinished business with academia. And this little seed grew inside me that I need to go back to academia and see if I can chase a PhD. And so when I was trying to pull this together, I wanted something that would blend my interest in psychology with my interest in philosophy with my economics background and my finance practical background. And I was really, feeling around for topics. And I, at that point, had never encountered the term behavioral finance. And I stumbled across it and I started reading books on it. And it just seemed the most perfect combination of theory and practice. There were bits of it that were very, very practical. It's about real decision making. There were bits that were very theoretical. It had this philosophical element about the philosophy of rationality and what is it that makes us rational or irrational. And it built on my economics background and my philosophy background. What it required that I had none of was psychology. I had no prior psychology at that point whatsoever. But anyway, I just thought this was the most fascinating combination of subjects, and I completely swerved my PhD proposal in that direction, and then spent the next few years studying it in obscene depth and very very narrow and very deep, which most PhDs are. And if I'm honest, I had no idea what I was going to do with it. It was a period of self-indulgence, if you like. I wanted to go and do a PhD, and I wanted it to be in something I was interested in. So I did not start studying it because I thought there was a career in it. I thought I would probably go back to consulting, or I might go into academia if the bug bit deep enough. But 1 year into me starting my PhD, Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for economics. And Daniel Kahneman, for those who don't know, is really the founding father of behavioral economics. And winning the Nobel Prize for economics was a neat trick for him because he wasn't an economist. He was a psychologist. And suddenly this field that I had studied just out of genuine interest started to have the glimmer of an actual career path ahead of it. And it became more and more popular. We started to have books being written on the subject more and more. And I was just very lucky when I finished my PhD. I was approached by a bank, by Barclays. Someone there had, read half of a Malcolm Gladwell book on behavioral science and decided that what the banking world needed was a behavioral finance team. And so they decided to start one. And so this thing I had started because I was just genuinely fascinated by it actually turned into a career that I've now been focused on applied behavioral finance for the last 20 plus years.
Such an interesting story, and really does have a touch of sort of being in the right place at the right time.
Absolutely. I mean, there was this moment where, what Barclays was looking for was somebody who had a PhD in this topic, relatively novel topic that, you had to do a design your own degree. There wasn't a packaged behavioral economics degree at that point. They wanted someone who also had previous commercial experience. And they wanted someone in the UK, and they wanted someone at about the right level of seniority who could start a team, but wasn't asking too much of them. And once you drew those circles into a Venn diagram, the intersection of them pretty much boiled down to me. There really wasn't anyone else who had followed that slightly bizarre path up to that point.
And for anyone listening who isn't familiar with these two words being put together, behavioural and finance,
Yeah.
maybe you can give us maybe a couple of psychological biases that play out, in that influence our financial decisions, that they can then say, oh, well, yeah, I see, I do that. Or
Well, I always try to avoid lists of biases. You see these a lot. Here are the 60 different psychological biases that we are all irredeemably subject to. I think maybe if I could put it in a slightly different way, every single decision we make, there is a tension between the choice that is most sensible or best for our objectives, the theoretically right choice that were we being really calm, collected, thoughtful individuals, that's the thing we would go for. There's a tension between that and the choice that just happens to feel most emotionally intuitive in the moment. And there's a huge gap between these two things sometimes, particularly in financial decision making. Invariably, the thing that feels comfortable to me right now is not the thing that finance theory tells us should be the right answer. And so behavioral finance is about understanding how people make decisions. What are the things that give us comfort when we make decisions, and why do we veer towards those decisions rather than the right decisions? And when we put this in a practical context, then applied behavioral economics or applied behavioral finance is about helping people to narrow that gap, to get closer to the quote unquote right answer by overcoming some of the emotional discomfort with that answer that leads us astray, that leads us to do things that actually are not in our interests. And let me give you a tangible example of that, because there are many, many out there. And probably the one that we encounter most often at the moment in an investing context is the biggest behavioral cost for most investors is not all the things they do when they're invested. I mean, there are lots of biases and lots of things that people do wrong and lots of ways in which we make decisions that chase emotional comfort. But the biggest, most reliable behavioral cost for most investors is the fact that they don't put enough of their wealth into their investments. They they sit with chunks of cash on the sidelines, doing nothing year after year after year after year. And it is incredibly costly. Why? Because no matter how much we tell people the logical story that in the long term, it's better to be invested than to sit on cash doing nothing, just losing value with inflation. In the short term, taking my money from somewhere that feels safe, my bank account or my mattress, if I'm, if I need that much security, taking my money from somewhere that feels safe and putting it into the investment markets feels emotionally uncomfortable. In the short term, it's a negative emotional trade-off. And so people, year after year, incur these huge foregone returns by leaving this wealth doing absolutely nothing. And there's a whole lot of different biases that pack into that. But in the essence of the problem is the thing that feels comfortable to me is not the thing that is going to grow my wealth. And what we want to do is bring those two together and help people to more comfortably make decisions that are better financial decisions.
so we're talking there about sort of major investments of large amounts of money, but at the end of the day, we're all dealing with financial decisions every day, throughout the day, and we probably see much use of behavioral science that we're not even aware is going on just in the supermarket in various ways in which items are sold to us. How can we sort of become in our everyday practice sort of more aware of our biases and make better financial decisions really, down at the grassroots, just in the supermarket?
Yeah. And I think you've just described something that's completely ubiquitous. When we enter an environment like a shop or a supermarket or an online environment, an Amazon or whatever, it feels familiar to us. It feels, a fairly neutral environment, but it's not. It's a theater. These environments have been constructed by people who are trying to make money from us. And they've thought very carefully about the placement of items, the route that you take through a supermarket, the clicks that you need to buy things. So in a sense, these environments are set up in order to make us feel more comfortable doing the things that the people who've designed the environments want us to do, which is buy things, right? So what can we do? Well, it's very difficult in the moment to step outside of that theater and see it as a theater, because it doesn't. It just feels like normal everyday life to us. One of the things that I think is most useful in all decisions is if we can impose on ourselves a pause point on every decision we make. What we're inspired to do at the moment, or encouraged to do at the moment, buy. If we are able to break the system in a way and put ourselves temporarily outside of that environment, and maybe it's by, on an online environment, closing the computer, closing the laptop, going to have a cup of tea, cup of coffee, 5 minutes, come back. If you still want to buy the thing, that's fine. You just have to break out of that theater that you've been put in. Now, of course, if you are going to the supermarket to buy things, then it's a bit silly if you go and leave the supermarket and go and have a cup of coffee and come back in. But there are other techniques we can use. I mean, we've gone to the supermarket in order to buy things, right? So simply creating a list of this is what I need, and going in there with the intent of buying what's on the list and not buying the stuff that's not on the list are simple techniques that can help us to break through that sort of theatrical wall that we've been cocooned in, and help us to make decisions that are where we're not being pushed around by the architecture of that theater that has been designed for us.
So now take that up a notch. And if I was then asking you the same question, but now we're having a conversation about me actually making a financial investment. So where are the steps that we can take again to make good financial decisions and not be swayed by our emotions?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first one, of course, is overcoming this reluctance to invest. And if that is a costly thing for most people, the first thing we want to do is to encourage people to overcome that behavioral barrier or behavioral hurdle. And there's many, many different ways of doing it. I mean, we've built a library, a behavioral library of nudges and interventions and narratives that can help people overcome this emotional barrier of putting their money to work. And there are somewhere between, depending how granularly you break it up, I think somewhere between 35 and 40 different behavioral techniques in this library that we've got that you can do. So there's many, many different things you can do. The important thing here is different interventions will work differently for different people because we all have different personalities. The blockers that specifically are getting in the way of you putting your money into the investment markets will be different from the ones that are getting in the way of me doing it. And so we need to match these interventions to people. Now, for a lot of people, it's the fact that investing is seen as, and indeed often intentionally portrayed as, being complex. It's lots of numbers, there's lots of choices, there's a fear of getting it wrong. And so one of the first things we need to do is to help people get the comfort that you don't have to get it perfectly right for getting invested to be a good decision, right? Getting going in a way, I mean, you have to make sure that you don't get it badly wrong, but getting going in a simple way, doesn't have to be perfectly right, is better than not getting going at all. So for some people, It's about simply giving them the comfort that here are a simple set of rules that you can follow, right? You're not going to be Warren Buffett, but that's fine. We don't need to be Warren Buffett to benefit from a rising investment market over years and years and years. And so, there's one narrative that I always find quite entertaining, because in investing, you often hear people say, oh, it's really risky. It's very difficult to predict. Investment markets are like a casino. And in a casino, you don't want to go into a casino. You might do it for fun, but you know that if you go into a casino and you play the roulette wheel day after day after day after day, you're going to lose because the odds are stacked against you. And so a lot of people think that investing in the markets is like this. And in one sense, it is like a casino, because day to day, it's almost entirely unpredictable. But here's the thing. If you put your money into the markets and you keep it there day after day after day after day, it's the opposite of the casino. You are the house. That's when you win, by being invested. The odds are in your favor if you are invested. The odds are not in your favor if you're not invested. So this fear that it's random and it's casino-like, etc., leads people to draw the wrong conclusion from it, which is, I better stay out. Whereas the right conclusion to say is, in the short term, it's random, it's difficult to predict, but in the long term, what we know is that you get returns from providing your money to others to put to productive use in the economy. In other words, by buying stocks and shares and bonds, etc. And in the long term, you are then the casino, you are the house, and you will benefit from that. So again, a lot of this stuff is about helping people overcome the short-term emotional fear or anxiety that is very, very real, but often grounded on false premises, and leading them to overcome that so they can benefit from the long-term value of being invested.
Fantastic. The Warren Buffett rule of investing. Basic, one thing, just stay in for the long term. And I'm so glad, Greg, that you mentioned earlier on there about needing to know the person, because we've all got we have our individual biases. And I think one of the most insightful books I read on this subject is the Morgan Housel, The Psychology of Money, which really sort of rang a bell with me. And we really need to consider that, don't we? That we all bring with ourselves our own sort of baggage of experiences, how we've been exposed to money, whether it's through our parents being thrifty or careless, or there not being much money or lots of money. So it's a really essential part of the jigsaw.
Yeah, and just our personality in general. One of the things, so I've been since 2007, I think, designed the first financial personality assessment that was being used in the banking world. And I've been refining that ever since. And one of the things that people who do this course, what have we called the course? The Art of Behavioural Investing. One of the things they'll get from that is access to our latest and greatest financial personality assessments that we being Oxford Risk is the company that I manage, and we build technology, behavioral science technology, to help people make better financial decisions. And we have this financial personality assessment where people can spend, it only takes 2-3 minutes. You answer a bunch of questions. These are all statistically validated against data from thousands and thousands of people all around the world. And you can understand how your personality, your financial personality, breaks down on a number of dimensions relative to other people. Once you know that, you know a bit more about which particular barriers are getting in the way of your personal good decision making.
That's really fascinating. We'll have to go away and look at that. And the other area I just wanted to touch on is we're all very careful where our money goes these days, whether it's just on the ground in the supermarket in terms of my purchasing choices, which streaming service I choose to invest in. And then, as you say, to the other end, where we're really making big investments in private companies, all coming under the area of sustainable investing. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that, which might be a new subject to some people.
Yeah, I think sustainable investing is very interesting from a behavioral perspective, because Actually, it in itself is one of the techniques you can use to encourage people to put their money to work. And the reason for that is mostly we get told we're investing in order to earn returns relative to the risk, risk return optimization. And it's very dry. And the reality is, yes, people are investing for financial returns, but everything we put our money into also has emotional labels attached to it. We're more comfortable investing in something that feels familiar to us, for example. So in every country around the world, people put more of their wealth to work in the stocks and shares of the companies that are housed in that country than global ones, for example. And it's a cost because it means that I'm investing less efficiently. But the other sense of emotional labels is, do these things meet my values? Do they align with what I want to see in the world? And it doesn't work for everyone. Again, people are different. Our data would say there's probably about 30% of people for whom investing in a way that's aligned to their values is just of no interest whatsoever. But the other 70% do want to make sure that the things they're putting their money into are aligned with their values, and they may be sustainable values, they may be social values, they may be religious values. But these are things not only that can encourage people to get invested, but it means that they get emotional benefits from investing in addition to any financial benefits that you might get. So the things you invest in, right, I'm already doing better than sitting in cash because now over time I'm earning returns from being engaged with the investing markets. But I also get that nice warm glow of knowing that I'm doing it in a way that resonates with me, and that's about that matches my values. And so these emotional labels that investments are bundled up with are really, really important because often they're the things that give people the emotional comfort to get invested and then to stay invested when markets get volatile. I mean, investing is always, it's not always. Investing will always at some point be a traumatic experience because markets drop. We don't know when, we don't know by how much, but what we know with absolute certainty is that if you have invested, there will be a time at some point where your investments will go down in value and it will be stressful. And so you're losing financial value as markets drop. But if you've got other reasons why you care about those investments, then it is much, much easier to do the sensible thing and hang on and stay invested and not panic at the bottom. So what is often seen by the financial services industry or by traditional finance theory as irrelevant side issues, these questions of my emotional attachment to investments are very, very powerful behavioral levers to help us make better financial decisions.
And do you see those as becoming more prominent in the investment market now? Is it something people are more considering, or does it come in waves?
It's interesting, actually. So it's becoming more accessible. The last 2 years, however, the field of sustainable investing has become quite politicized. And certain labels like ESG, environment, social governance investing, in some places have actually become quite toxic, and there's been a retraction of interest, partly because as much as I might want to invest in things that meet my values, I don't want to get into all the political arguments and the toxicity that might involve. What has not changed, however, is my underlying values. I mean, I still care about what I care about, and I would still prefer to be invested in these things. So I think there has been a little bit of a lull in the last 12 to 24 months in terms of what was previously a very growing area of sustainable investing has gone a bit on the back burner for the last couple of years. But I don't think it's going away anytime soon because we increasingly recognize the behavioral benefits of it. We recognize the social benefits of it. And it is that much easier now to build products that reflect this. The technology and the choice of products available in the financial services world is ever more greater. So people have an ever greater ability to choose the things that resonate with them. Whereas if you go back decades, they just weren't there wasn't that much nuance on offer with regard to investment funds, etc.
Now, this is two questions, really. If this is a subject for somebody who's listening where it's just a completely new subject, and I just want to, I'm really interested in that, I'm going to ask you where they should go to read about it. And if I'm the type of person who feels I sort of know a bit about that and I'm now interested in pursuing the subject of maybe finance investments with a more behavioural slant, can you give us a few routes for things that might be useful to read, or websites, things like that, materials?
Well, I mean, I think I'd be remiss to start with if I didn't suggest going to 42 courses and doing the art of behavioral investing. And there is something for everyone in that. I mean, it is really designed to go from brass tacks upwards. This is the first of two courses, and the second one will be more in depth, more about practical tools, etc. So certainly, one of the reasons that we did this course in the first place was a recognition that there actually isn't that much out there that focuses on this topic from the ground up. There are books out there that are worth reading. I mean, you'd already mentioned Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Investing. We have on the course a number of contributors who are wonderful behavioral finance specialists who have written their own books on the topic. Dr. Daniel Crosby in the United States, he's got a number of books out that are worth reading in this area. Carl Richards, Mr. Behavior Gap, has written very accessible works in this area. Brian Portnoy also books The Geometry of Wealth. So there are certainly books out there that you can pursue. I've always found it difficult to point to one thing that says, right, if you want to know about behavioral investing, that's where you go. And that's really why we created this course. This is stuff I've been working with and thinking about for 15 or 20 years. And when it came to putting the course together, you realize just how much, I've written in blogs and, various bits over those 15 years. And one of the wonderful things about doing this course was pulling all that material together and sifting through it and trying to organize it in a way that's accessible for people new to this, or people who want to step up a level. If you really want to step up a level, of course, these days there are master's courses in behavioral science and behavioral finance and behavioral economics. So that wasn't true when I started this 20 plus years ago, but now, it's possible to pursue this as a dedicated academic discipline. And there are a number of really, really good master's courses and undergrad courses in that, that if you have an interest in it, I would definitely recommend. And if you have an interest in it and you want to spend several years studying something, this is a fascinating field to study. It's so multidisciplinary. It combines economics, philosophy, maths, psychology, finance, you name it. It's a wonderfully exciting thing to dig deep into.
That's really great. Thanks, Greg. And we'll put the names of all those authors and their books in the show notes. Are there any sort of surprising things that you have learned about behavior, about human behavior through your work? Is there something that or something that constantly like, oh, I can't believe they've done that again, or how is it that we make these mistakes?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm surprised by this anymore, but a question I'm often asked is, well, have the decades of study and knowledge that we've built up about the behavioral science of decision making and about behavioral finance, do they mean that we're going to be better decision makers and we're going to be less prone to market booms and busts and crashes, etc.? And I'm not surprised by this anymore, but I think the answer is no. Human nature is very, very deeply rooted in us. And actually, there's a book published in 1841. It's called Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And at that point in 1841, Charles Mackay, who's the author, already explores 6 different financial crises the tulip bubble, the South Sea bubble, the Mississippi bubble. In 1841, we already had 6 clear examples of booms and busts where people had got over enthusiastic and overly fearful. The fact that we know about this stuff doesn't stop it happening. Human nature has not changed. And so I don't, one surprise there is I don't think most of humanity has become a better decision maker in any way whatsoever over the last 200 years, or indeed even the last 30 years as we focused in on behavioral science. What we do have, though, is a better toolbox of techniques and approaches. When I said earlier with the supermarket or the online purchasing, build a pause point. If you find yourself tempted to do something, take a break, put yourself out of the emotional context of that decision. Now, it's a very simple technique, but it's one that we can use to, it doesn't change our personality. It doesn't change our tendency to become emotionally sucked into these things, but it provides a circuit breaker. And these days, I think what we have got at an individual level, if you spend time studying it and you spend time building your own toolbox, is we have a greater ability to overcome our innate tendencies to get emotionally involved in the decisions.
Well, I think that's a great point to wrap up now, Greg, with that very sound advice to whenever you're making a big financial decision, just to take a pause. So we don't mean leave the supermarket and stand out on the street in between every purchase, but I think
Yeah, my one too.
you know what we mean. Well, it's been really lovely chatting with you again, Greg.
Absolutely.
As you've mentioned, we have the upcoming new course at 42courses.com, the Behavioural Investing course, soon to be launched. So keep your eyes open for that. And in addition to that, Greg, where can listeners come to find you and more about your work and what you do?
2 places primarily, I'd say. LinkedIn, I put pretty much all content that we write out. I post that up on LinkedIn at some point or another. The other one, and this is probably a little bit more directed at financial advisors and people a little bit more involved with the industry. But Oxford Risk is our company, and we build technology to help people make better financial decisions. So www.oxfordrisk.com. All of our content and our blogs, etc., are put out there. So that's another place you can go for to find me and find what we're working on.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for joining me today, Greg, to chance with your course and about the subject of behavioural investing. I hope you will go away and make great financial decisions for the rest of the day. Thank you all very much, and join us again for another podcast with 42 Courses.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this 42 Courses podcast. If you did, please like and share. Any comments are also very, very welcome. And of course, if you want to learn more about us, visit our website at 42courses.com. Thanks again.